When grief is supposed to unite a family, but instead it reveals their true nature, you discover who people really are beneath their masks. When your own flesh and blood chooses the worst moment of your life to inflict unimaginable pain, you realize that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. When standing at your husband's graveside becomes the moment your son decides to replace you, there comes a breaking point where maternal instincts give way to something much more powerful. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain had stopped just as the last shovel of earth covered my husband David's casket, but the storm inside me was just beginning. At 58 years old, I thought I understood grief. I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. I was wrong. Nothing could have prepared me for what my son Marcus would do that gray October afternoon at Riverside Cemetery in Portland, Oregon. My name is Catherine Winters, and for 35 years, I built what I believed was a loving family. David. And I met in college when we were both studying at Portland State University. He was majoring in engineering while I pursued my degree in social work. We married young, barely 22, and spent the next 3 decades building a life together. David worked his way up to become a senior project manager at a construction firm, while I dedicated my career to helping troubled youth at the county juvenile center. We had 2 children, Marcus, now 31, and our daughter Sarah, 28. I thought we'd raise them with strong values, emphasizing respect, compassion, and family loyalty. David was especially close to Marcus, spending countless weekends teaching him woodworking in our garage, taking him camping in the Oregon mountains, coaching his little league teams. When Marcus showed interest in following his father into construction, David was overjoyed. He helped Marcus get his contractor's license and even co-signed the loan for Marcus's first work truck. Sarah had moved to Seattle 5 years ago for her marketing career at a tech company. She was married to a wonderful man named Alex, and they were expecting their first child. The distance made visits less frequent, but our relationship remained warm and genuine. She called every Sunday without fail, remembered every birthday and anniversary, and made the effort to include David and me in her life's milestones. Marcus was different. Something had shifted in our relationship over the past 2 years, ever since he'd started dating Jennifer. She was 25, barely out of college, working as a dental hygienist. Beautiful in that obvious way some young women are, with platinum blonde hair and a wardrobe that seemed designed to attract attention rather than complement her personality. But beauty wasn't the problem. The problem was how she looked at our family, at our modest 3-bedroom ranch house in southeast Portland, at our 15-year-old Honda Civic, at David's worn work boots by the front door. The first time Marcus brought Jennifer to Sunday dinner, I caught her photographing our family photos with a smirk, whispering something to Marcus that made him laugh uncomfortably. When David told one of his favorite stories about the time he and Marcus built a treehouse together, Jennifer had rolled her eyes and made a comment about rustic family traditions. The disrespect was subtle but unmistakable. Over the following months, Marcus began declining our dinner invitations. When he did visit, Jennifer was always with him, steering conversations toward her own interests, interrupting David's stories, making passive-aggressive comments about our old-fashioned way of doing things. She had opinions about everything, from our furniture to our choice of restaurants, always delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. David noticed it too. "That girl doesn't respect what we've built here," he told me one evening after a particularly uncomfortable dinner, where Jennifer had spent the entire meal on her phone, posting selfies and complaining about the outdated kitchen. "Marcus is changing, Catherine. He's starting to see us through her eyes." I wanted to believe David was overreacting, that Marcus was just going through a phase. Young men in new relationships sometimes distance themselves from family. But the signs became impossible to ignore. Marcus stopped calling on Father's Day. He missed David's birthday for the first time in 31 years, claiming he had to work late. When David was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer last spring, Marcus's reaction wasn't the devastation and support we expected. Instead, he seemed almost annoyed by the inconvenience of hospital visits and medical appointments. The 6 months of David's illness revealed everything I needed to know about my son's character. While Sarah drove down from Seattle every other weekend to help with David's care, bringing homemade meals and sitting for hours reading to her father, Marcus made excuses. He was busy with work projects. Jennifer had plans they couldn't change. He'd visit when things calmed down. During David's final weeks, when he was bedridden and requiring around-the-clock care, I barely slept. I took leave from my job to become his full-time caregiver, managing his medications, helping him to the bathroom, holding his hand through the worst of the pain. Sarah stayed for 2 weeks straight, sleeping on our couch and helping me navigate the endless stream of doctors, nurses, and hospice workers. Marcus visited 3 times during those final weeks. Each visit lasted less than an hour. Jennifer accompanied him twice, spending most of the time in our living room scrolling through her phone, while Marcus sat awkwardly beside David's bed, clearly uncomfortable with the reality of watching his father die. During his last visit, 3 days before David passed, Marcus actually took a phone call in the middle of talking to his dying father, stepping out to discuss some work deadline that apparently couldn't wait. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. David died on a Tuesday morning in early October. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, with Sarah crying softly on the other side of the bed. The hospice nurse called Marcus to inform him. His response was, "Okay, thanks for letting me know. I'll be in touch about arrangements. No rushing over. No immediate grief. Just a business-like acknowledgement of the information." The funeral planning became another source of pain. Sarah and I spent days coordinating with the funeral home, choosing the casket, writing the obituary, selecting flowers, and planning the service. Marcus contributed nothing except complaints about the cost and suggestions that we keep things simple, since David wouldn't have wanted anything fancy. When I mentioned that David had specifically requested his favorite hymn be sung during the service, Marcus suggested we just play a recording instead of hiring the church soloist, because it would save money. The funeral was scheduled for Friday afternoon at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, where David and I had been married 35 years earlier. David had been an active member of the congregation, serving on the vestry and helping with building maintenance. The church was important to him, and having his funeral there felt like honoring his memory properly. Thursday evening, the night before the funeral, Marcus called me. "Mom, I wanted to give you a heads up about tomorrow. Jennifer is going to be with me, obviously, and she's going to sit with the family." Something in his tone set off alarm bells. "Of course she can sit with the family, Marcus. She's been part of your life for 2 years. "Right. Well, there's something else. Jennifer and I have been talking, and she's really stepped up during this difficult time. She's been incredibly supportive, helping me process Dad's death and thinking about the future. I want you to know that I consider her family now, and I'm going to introduce her as such to people who don't know her." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "I mean she's going to be my family going forward. Mom, she's going to be the woman who helps me through this grief and supports me as I figure out life without Dad. I think it's important that people understand her role in my life." The conversation felt surreal. My husband was lying in a funeral home a few miles away, and my son was talking about his girlfriend's role in his life, as if David's death was primarily about Marcus's future rather than our collective loss. "Marcus, tomorrow is your father's funeral. It's a day for honoring his memory and supporting each other through grief. Whatever you want to say about Jennifer's importance in your life can wait until a more appropriate time." His voice took on an edge I'd never heard before. Jennifer has been more supportive during Dad's illness than anyone else in this family. She's the one who helped me understand that sometimes people die and you have to move forward. She's helped me see that clinging to the past isn't healthy. Clinging to the past? Marcus, your father died 3 days ago. Grief isn't clinging to the past. It's a natural human response to losing someone you love. Whatever, Mom. I'm just letting you know how tomorrow is going to go. Jennifer is family now, and I'm going to treat her as such. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my kitchen, staring at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah, who had been staying with me since David's death, found me there 20 minutes later, still holding the receiver. Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I told her about the conversation, watching her face transform from confusion to disbelief to anger. He said, "What? Mom, please tell me you misunderstood something." I wish I had. Sarah, I think Marcus is planning to do something terrible tomorrow, and I don't know how to stop it. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying Marcus's words, trying to understand what he meant by introducing Jennifer as family to people who didn't know her. Every scenario I imagined was worse than the last, but nothing my imagination conjured could have prepared me for what actually happened. Friday dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp October day David had always loved. The church was full of people whose lives David had touched over the years. His co-workers, our neighbors, church members, my colleagues from the juvenile center, extended family from across the Pacific Northwest. Seeing so many people gathered to honor David's memory should have been comforting. Instead, I felt a growing sense of dread about whatever Marcus was planning. The service was beautiful. Pastor Williams delivered a heartfelt eulogy about David's dedication to family and community. Sarah read a poem she'd written about her father's love of the outdoors. Several of David's closest friends shared memories of his kindness and humor. Through it all, Marcus sat in the front pew beside Jennifer, his face impassive, offering no words of remembrance for the man who had been his devoted father for 31 years. After the service, we processed to Riverside Cemetery for the burial. The autumn leaves were at their peak, creating a tapestry of gold and crimson that David would have appreciated. As the pastor said the final prayers over the casket, I felt a complex mix of grief, gratitude for the life David and I had shared, and growing anxiety about Marcus's intentions. The moment that changed everything came as people began approaching, me with condolences after the burial. Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor who had known Marcus since he was a baby, walked over with tears in her eyes. "Catherine, dear, I'm so sorry for your loss. David was such a wonderful man." She hugged me gently, then looked around. I wanted to say hello to Marcus, but I don't see him. I looked around and spotted him about 20 feet away, standing, with Jennifer beside a large oak tree. Several people from David's work were gathered around them. As Mrs. Patterson and I approached, I heard Marcus speaking to the group. "Thank you all for being here today. This has been incredibly difficult, but I'm grateful to have Jennifer by my side. She's been my rock through all of this." He put his arm around Jennifer's waist and pulled her closer. "I'd like you all to meet Jennifer, my new mother." The words hit me like a physical blow. The small group of David's co-workers stood in stunned silence. Mrs. Patterson gasped audibly beside me. Jennifer, rather than looking embarrassed or attempting to correct the introduction, smiled and extended her hand to the group. "It's so nice to meet David's friends," she said sweetly. "Marcus has told me so much about his father. I'm here to support him through this transition." I felt the world tilt sideways. My son, standing beside his father's fresh grave, had just introduced his 25-year-old girlfriend as his new mother to a group of people who had known our family for years. The disrespect was so profound, so shocking, that for a moment I couldn't even process what I'd heard. Mrs. Patterson recovered first. "Excuse me," she said sharply, looking directly at Marcus. "Did you just introduce this young woman as your mother at your father's funeral? While your actual mother is standing right here?" Marcus had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable, but Jennifer stepped in smoothly. "I think what Marcus means is that I'm going to be taking care of him now, providing the maternal support he needs as he processes this loss and moves forward with his life." The audacity was breathtaking. Sarah, who had been greeting other mourners nearby, hurried over when she noticed the commotion. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking between Marcus and the horrified faces of David's co-workers. "Your brother just introduced his girlfriend as his new mother," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice shaking with indignation. "At your father's funeral? I've never heard of such a thing." Sarah's face went white, then red with anger. "Marcus, tell me that's not true." Marcus straightened his shoulders defensively. "I introduced Jennifer as the person who's going to be supporting me going forward. She's going to be family. I don't see what the big deal is." "The big deal," Sarah said, her voice rising despite the cemetery setting, "is that our father is literally being buried right now. And you just introduced your girlfriend as mom's replacement to a group of dad's friends. How can you possibly think that's appropriate?" By this point, other mourners had begun to notice the commotion. I could see people whispering and pointing in our direction. The burial that should have been a dignified farewell to David was turning into a spectacle because of my son's incomprehensible cruelty. "I think we should continue this conversation at home," I said quietly, trying to salvage what remained of the day's dignity. "There's nothing to discuss," Marcus replied. "I'm 31 years old. I can introduce my girlfriend however I want. If you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine." Jennifer nodded supportively. "We're just trying to be honest about our relationship and our plans for the future. I don't understand why everyone is so upset about transparency." Transparency. At my husband's funeral, my son's girlfriend was calling it transparency to be introduced as his new mother, while I stood there in my funeral dress, still wearing the wedding ring David had placed on my finger 35 years earlier. That was the moment I understood that the son I had raised, the boy David had taught to throw a baseball and build birdhouses, was gone. In his place stood a stranger who could inflict this level of cruelty on his grieving mother at his father's graveside. The ride home from the cemetery was silent except for Sarah's quiet crying in the passenger seat. Marcus and Jennifer had left immediately after the confrontation, claiming they had other commitments. The house felt enormous and empty when we walked through the front door. David's reading glasses were still on the kitchen table where he'd left them the morning he died. His coffee mug sat in the sink, waiting to be washed. Everything looked exactly the same, but the world had fundamentally changed. "Mom," Sarah said as we stood in the kitchen, still in our funeral clothes, "I need you to know that what Marcus did today was unforgivable. I'm ashamed to call him my brother." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The grief of losing David had been overwhelming enough. Now I was facing the additional loss of my son, not to death, but to a callousness I couldn't have imagined possible. That evening, after Sarah had helped me greet the neighbors who brought food and flowers, after we'd endured the awkward conversations with relatives who had witnessed Marcus's behavior at the cemetery, I sat alone in the bedroom I'd shared with David for 28 years. The silence was deafening. I thought about the life David and I had built together, the sacrifices we'd made for our children, the dreams we'd had for their futures. I thought about the college tuition we'd paid for Marcus, the down payment we'd helped him make on his first house, the countless hours David had spent teaching him skills and values that Marcus had apparently discarded along with his respect for his family. Most of all, I thought about what David would have said about Marcus's behavior. David, who had never spoken an unkind word about either of our children, who had made excuses for Marcus's increasing selfishness during his illness, who had died hoping that his son would eventually return to the young man he'd raised. As I prepared for my first night alone in the house, I made a decision. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being a victim of my son's cruelty. I wasn't going to quietly accept being replaced and disrespected. I had spent 35 years being the kind of mother who put her children's needs before her own, who made excuses for their bad behavior, who enabled their selfishness in the name of unconditional love. That version of Catherine Winters had died at Riverside Cemetery along with my husband. What rose from those ashes was someone with a much clearer understanding of her own worth and a much lower tolerance for disrespect. The transformation began that very night, as I sat in David's favorite chair, surrounded by sympathy cards and casserole dishes from people who genuinely cared about our family. I realized that respect isn't something you can demand or beg for. It's something you command through your actions and boundaries. My son had shown me exactly who he was and what I meant to him. Now it was time to show him exactly who I could become when pushed beyond all reasonable limits of maternal patience and forgiveness. The first week after David's funeral passed in a haze of administrative tasks that death demands of the living. I spent my days meeting with lawyers, insurance agents, and bank representatives, slowly untangling the financial threads of a 35-year marriage. Sarah had extended her leave from work to help me navigate the maze of paperwork, and her presence was the only thing keeping me anchored to sanity. Marcus didn't call. Not once, not to check on my well-being, not to apologize for his cemetery performance, not even to ask about his father's affairs. His silence spoke louder than any words could have. Meanwhile, Jennifer had apparently decided that social media was the appropriate venue for processing her boyfriend's grief. Sarah showed me the Instagram posts with barely contained fury, photos of Jennifer and Marcus at expensive restaurants, tagged with captions like, "Helping my man heal through this difficult time," and "Love means being there for each other during life's challenges." In one particularly offensive post, Jennifer had shared a photo of herself in a designer black dress with the caption, "Sometimes life asks us to step up and fill roles we never expected. Grateful to be Marcus's support system during this transition. New beginnings, family, strength." The hashtag New Beginnings at a funeral aftermath made my stomach turn. "Mom, you need to see this," Sarah said one morning, her laptop open on the kitchen table. She'd been monitoring Jennifer's social media presence with the dedication of a detective. She posted this last night. The photo showed Jennifer and Marcus at what appeared to be a high-end furniture store, both of them smiling as they sat on an expensive leather sofa. The caption read, "Helping Marcus create a space that reflects his new chapter. Out with the old, in with the new. Sometimes we have to let go of the past to embrace our future." The interior design, Chief Fresh Start, modern living. I stared at the screen, feeling something cold and hard forming in my chest. They're redecorating his house. "It gets worse, Mom. Look at the comments." Jennifer had responded to various friends' comments with revealing details. She mentioned clearing out all the outdated family photos and replacing Marcus's inherited furniture with pieces that better reflected their shared aesthetic. She talked about creating a sophisticated adult space that wasn't weighed down by childhood memories. This wasn't just disrespect, this was systematic erasure. Jennifer was methodically removing every trace of David from Marcus's life, and my son was not only allowing it, but participating enthusiastically. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. "Alex has a friend who works at First National Bank downtown. He saw Marcus there yesterday with Jennifer, and they were meeting with someone about estate planning. Alex's friend said they seemed to be discussing inheritance procedures." The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. David had left Marcus a substantial inheritance, including half ownership of our family home and a significant portion of his life insurance policy. The other half of everything had come to me, but Marcus's share was considerable. Apparently, Jennifer had wasted no time in helping him understand the financial implications of his father's death. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had worked as David's assistant for the past 8 years, knocked on my front door carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression of barely contained outrage. "Catherine, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I have something I think you need to see." She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where David and I had shared thousands of meals, and opened the envelope with trembling hands. Before David passed, he asked me to help him with some personal paperwork. He was very specific about wanting to document certain things, especially regarding his relationship with Marcus over the past 2 years. He was worried about how Marcus was changing, and he wanted to leave you with a clear picture of what he'd observed. The envelope contained a detailed letter in David's familiar handwriting, along with printed copies of text messages between David and Marcus, and what appeared to be a financial record of every gift and loan David had given Marcus over the years. David was methodical about everything, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. When Marcus started asking for money more frequently, David began keeping records. When Marcus stopped visiting during his illness, David started screenshotting their text conversations. He said he wanted you to have the full truth if anything happened to him. I opened David's letter with shaking hands. His handwriting, weakened by illness but still recognizable, covered 3 pages of yellow legal paper. "My dearest Catherine," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably struggling to understand what happened to our son. I've been watching Marcus change over the past 2 years, and I'm afraid the boy we raised is being systematically replaced by someone I don't recognize." The letter detailed David's growing concerns about Jennifer's influence over Marcus. He'd documented instances of her encouraging Marcus to see his parents as holding him back and keeping him from reaching his potential. David had overheard phone conversations where Jennifer spoke about our modest lifestyle as embarrassing and our old-fashioned values as outdated. But the most devastating part of the letter focused on Marcus's financial requests. Over the past 18 months, Marcus had borrowed nearly $40,000 from David for various business opportunities and investment chances. Each time, he'd promised quick repayment. None of the money had ever been returned, and, according to David's notes, most of it had been spent on expensive gifts for Jennifer and upgrades to Marcus's lifestyle that she'd deemed necessary. "The hardest part to write," David's letter continued, "is what I discovered about Marcus's visits during my illness. I know you thought he was just uncomfortable with medical situations, but the truth is worse. I overheard him on the phone with Jennifer during his last visit, complaining about having to pretend to care for a few hours, and asking when we would just get this over with. Catherine, our son, was treating my death as an inconvenience." Tears blurred my vision as I read David's final paragraphs. "I'm leaving you this information not to poison you against Marcus, but because I believe you deserve to make decisions based on truth rather than the fantasy of who we hoped he would become. The Marcus we raised might still exist somewhere inside, the man he's become, but Jennifer has convinced him that his family is an obstacle to overcome rather than a foundation to build upon. Don't let them take advantage of your grief and generosity the way they took advantage of my illness and love." Mrs. Rodriguez watched me read in respectful silence. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "David was very clear about wanting you to have this immediately after the funeral. He was worried about what Marcus might do during your grieving period. David loved that boy with all his heart, but he wasn't blind to what Marcus had become." That evening, after Mrs. Rodriguez left, I sat with David's letter and supporting documents spread across the kitchen table. The financial records painted a clear picture of Marcus's escalating demands for money, always accompanied by promises he never intended to keep. The text message printouts showed David's patient attempts to maintain a relationship with a son who responded with increasing irritation and decreasing respect. But it was David's handwritten observations about Jennifer's behavior that truly opened my eyes. He'd documented her comments about our house being quaint but impractical, her suggestions that Marcus deserved better than his upbringing had provided, and her frequent references to our family traditions as limiting his growth potential. David had seen what I'd been too hopeful to acknowledge. Jennifer wasn't just dating Marcus. She was systematically reprogramming him to see his family as inadequate and his past as something to escape. The next morning brought a call that changed everything. My phone rang at 7:30, waking me from the first decent sleep I'd had since David's death. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Los Angeles area code. "Mrs. Winters? This is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates in Beverly Hills. I'm calling about your late husband's brother, Robert Winters." I was confused. David's brother Robert had moved to California 15 years ago after a family dispute over their father's estate. David and Robert had barely spoken since then, exchanging only occasional Christmas cards and brief phone calls on birthdays. I hadn't even thought to notify Robert about David's death. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, but I'm not sure why you're calling. David and his brother weren't close. Mrs. Winters, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Robert passed away 2 months ago from a heart attack. He was my client, and as his estate attorney, I've been trying to locate his surviving family members." 2 months ago. Robert had died 2 months ago, and we'd never known. I felt a pang of guilt for the estrangement that had kept the brothers apart during their final years. "I'm sorry to hear about Robert's passing," I said. "But I should let you know that my husband David also passed away recently, last week actually. So if you're trying to reach him about estate matters..." "Actually, Mrs. Winters, I'm calling specifically for you. Robert left very detailed instructions about his estate, and you're named as the primary beneficiary." The words didn't make sense. "I'm sorry, what? There must be some mistake. Robert and David hadn't spoken in years. I barely knew Robert. That's exactly why I need to explain the situation. Robert spent the last several months of his life investigating his estranged family members. He hired a private investigator to research David's family situation, including your marriage, your children, and your current circumstances. Based on what he learned, he made some very specific decisions about his estate." I sank onto the kitchen chair where I'd read David's letter the night before. "What kind of decisions?" "Mrs. Winters, Robert was quite wealthy. He'd built a successful real estate development company in Los Angeles, and his investment portfolio was substantial. His estate is valued at approximately $18 million. The number seemed abstract, impossible. 18 million? Yes, and according to his will, the entirety of that estate comes to you, with very specific stipulations about how it should be used. Robert left detailed instructions and a personal letter explaining his reasoning. I'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss the details in person." After ending the call, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, trying to process what I'd just heard. Robert, the brother-in-law I'd met perhaps a dozen times in 35 years, had left me $18 million. The timing seemed impossible, arriving just when I was grappling with David's revelations about Marcus and processing the magnitude of my son's betrayal. Sarah arrived an hour later to find me still sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by David's documents and my notes from the lawyer's call. "Mom, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong?" I told her about both revelations. David's letter documenting Marcus's transformation and Robert's unexpected inheritance. Sarah listened in growing amazement, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just absorbing the magnitude of what had happened. $18 million, she repeated when I finished. "Mom, do you understand what this means? You're not just financially secure, you're wealthy. Like, seriously wealthy." The implications were staggering. I'd gone from being a widowed social worker living on David's modest life insurance and pension to being a multimillionaire overnight. But more importantly, I'd gained something even more valuable: the power to respond to Marcus's cruelty from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. "There's something else," I told Sarah, pulling out my phone. "I want you to see the text message Marcus sent me this morning." The message was brief and businesslike. "Mom, Jennifer and I need to discuss Dad's estate arrangements with you soon. There are some assets that should probably be liquidated and reinvested more aggressively. Jennifer has some good financial advisors we should meet with. Can we set up a time this week?" Sarah read the message twice, her expression growing darker each time. "He wants to manage Dad's money. He's literally trying to take control of your finances through his girlfriend's advisors. He doesn't know about Robert's inheritance." "Yet," I said. "As far as Marcus knows, I'm a grieving widow who might be overwhelmed by financial decisions and grateful for his help. What are you going to do?" For the first time since David's death, I felt something other than grief and exhaustion. I felt clarity. Marcus had shown me exactly who he was and what I meant to him. He'd introduced his girlfriend as his new mother at his father's funeral, erased his father's memory from his home, and now planned to manipulate his grieving mother's finances. He'd calculated that my emotional vulnerability would make me easy to control. He'd miscalculated. "I'm going to Los Angeles to meet with Robert's attorney," I said. "And then I'm going to come back here and show Marcus the difference between a victim and a woman who refuses to be victimized." The flight to Los Angeles gave me time to think about the strange symmetry of my situation. Just as in the story of Job, everything had been taken from me at once: my husband, my son's respect, my sense of family security. But unlike Job, I wasn't being tested by cosmic forces. I was being tested by human cruelty and greed. And unlike Job, I had been given the tools to respond with more than just faith and patience. James Morrison's Beverly Hills office occupied the top floor of a glass tower that offered panoramic views of the city. Morrison himself was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from decades of handling sensitive family matters. "Mrs. Winters, thank you for making the trip. I know this must be an overwhelming time for you, losing both your husband and discovering Robert's legacy." He led me to a conference room where Robert's will and personal documents were arranged, in neat stacks. The centerpiece was a sealed envelope with my name written in handwriting I recognized from old Christmas cards. "Before we discuss the legal details," Morrison said, "Robert wanted you to read his personal letter. Everything else will make more sense afterward." I opened the envelope with the same nervous energy I'd felt reading David's letter. Robert's handwriting was stronger than David's had been, reflecting his health at the time of writing. "Dear Catherine," it began, "by the time you read this, both David and I will be gone, and you'll be wondering why a brother-in-law you barely knew has left you his fortune. The answer is simple: because you're the only person in our family who understood what family really means." The letter went on to explain Robert's research into our family situation. He'd hired investigators to understand why David had seemed so sad during their rare phone conversations over the past 2 years. The investigators had uncovered Marcus's treatment of his parents, Jennifer's influence over him, and the increasing emotional distance between Marcus and his family. "I made mistakes with David," Robert's letter continued. "I let pride and stubbornness destroy our relationship over money that ultimately didn't matter. I don't want my fortune to create more family destruction, but I also don't want good people to be victimized by bad ones. You gave David a lifetime of love and loyalty. Your children should be protecting and honoring you, not calculating how to exploit your grief." The most important paragraph came near the end. "This inheritance comes with no restrictions on how you use it, but I have some suggestions. Don't let Marcus know about it immediately. Watch how he treats you when he thinks you're vulnerable. Let him show you exactly who he's become. Then decide whether he deserves the mercy you'll be tempted to show him or the consequences he's actually earned. Morrison watched me read with the patience of a man accustomed to emotional revelations. When I finished, he opened the legal documents and began explaining the inheritance structure. Robert was very strategic about minimizing tax implications, Morrison explained. The estate includes his real estate development company, which generates substantial passive income, a diversified investment portfolio, and several properties in prime Los Angeles locations. After estate taxes, you're looking at approximately $14 million in liquid assets, plus ongoing income from the business operations. $14 million. The number was so large it felt fictional, but Morrison continued with practical details that made it real. Bank account numbers, investment statements, property deeds, business ownership documents. By the end of our 3-hour meeting, I was the owner of assets I couldn't have imagined possessing a week earlier. "There's one more thing," Morrison said as we concluded our business. "Robert left instructions for me to give you this if you decided to accept the inheritance." He handed me a small jewelry box. Inside was a simple gold locket that I recognized from old family photos. It had belonged to David and Robert's mother, my late mother-in-law. "Robert wanted you to have something that represented the family legacy he hoped you'd continue. Not the legacy of wealth, but the legacy of treating family with love and respect." Flying back to Portland, I held the locket in my palm and thought about the responsibility Robert had given me. This wasn't just about money. It was about using power wisely, about responding to cruelty without becoming cruel, about maintaining dignity while refusing to be a victim. Sarah met me at the airport, eager to hear about the meeting. During the drive home, I explained the full scope of Robert's gift and his reasoning behind it. "Mom, this is incredible. You have the power to do anything you want. You could travel the world, buy a mansion, never worry about money again." "I could," I agreed. "But first, I'm going to let Marcus show me exactly who he's become." Robert was right about watching how people treat you when they think you're vulnerable. I want to see just how far Marcus is willing to go. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm going to respond to his text message about meeting with Jennifer's financial advisors. I'm going to act like a confused, grieving widow who needs help making decisions. And then I'm going to watch them try to manipulate me into giving them control over what they think is David's modest estate." "That sounds dangerous, Mom. What if they actually convince you to sign something?" I smiled, feeling something I hadn't experienced since David's diagnosis: confidence in my own power. "Sarah, I've spent 30 years helping troubled youth navigate complex family situations. I know manipulation when I see it. The difference is that now I have the resources to respond appropriately." When we arrived home, I found 3 more text messages from Marcus, each more insistent than the last about scheduling our financial planning meeting. The last one included a subtle threat. "Mom, I hope you're not making any major financial decisions without consulting someone with more business experience. Dad wouldn't want you to make mistakes out of grief." The implication was clear. I was too emotional and inexperienced to handle my own finances, and Marcus was generously offering to protect me from my own poor judgment. It was exactly the kind of paternalistic manipulation that David had warned me about in his letter. I texted Marcus back. "You're right, honey. I'm feeling overwhelmed by all the financial paperwork. Can you and Jennifer come over this weekend to help me understand everything? I'd be so grateful for your guidance." His response came within minutes. "Of course, Mom. We'll be there Saturday afternoon. Jennifer is really good with financial planning, and she has some ideas that could really help you maximize your assets." Sarah read the exchange over my shoulder and shook her head. "He sounds like a predator circling wounded prey." "That's exactly what he is," I agreed. "But he doesn't know that this particular prey has grown some very sharp teeth." The next few days passed quietly as I prepared for Saturday's encounter. I contacted my own attorney to ensure that no document Marcus and Jennifer might present could legally bind me to anything. I arranged for a financial advisor recommended by Morrison to be available by phone if needed. Most importantly, I practiced the role of confused, grateful widow who would be easily influenced by her son's superior business knowledge. Saturday morning, I dressed carefully in one of my more worn outfits, the kind of clothes that suggested financial worry. I messed up my hair slightly and made sure to look tired and overwhelmed. When Marcus and Jennifer arrived at 2 o'clock, I was ready to give the performance of my lifetime. "Oh, Marcus, thank goodness you're here," I said, embracing him with what I hoped looked like desperate relief. "I've been so worried about making the wrong decisions with your father's money. You know how he always handled everything financial." Jennifer was dressed like she was attending a business meeting, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of professional competence. She'd styled herself as the knowledgeable advisor who would rescue the helpless widow from her own ignorance. "Mrs. Winters," she said warmly, "Marcus and I are here to help you through this difficult transition. Financial decisions can be overwhelming even under the best circumstances." For the next hour, they presented their plan with the confidence of people who believed they were speaking to someone with no other options. Jennifer had researched David's pension, life insurance, and our modest savings account. She'd prepared detailed charts showing how my limited assets could be optimized through aggressive investment strategies that would, coincidentally, require substantial management fees paid to her recommended advisors. The beauty of their scheme was its apparent reasonableness. They weren't trying to steal my money outright. Instead, they were positioning themselves as the sophisticated financial managers who would protect me from poor decisions while skimming profits from every transaction. "The key," Jennifer explained, pointing to her charts, "is leveraging your assets to create maximum growth potential. Marcus and I have identified some opportunities that could triple your returns over the next 5 years." "That sounds wonderful," I said, playing my role perfectly. "But it also sounds complicated. Are you sure an old teacher like me can understand all this?" "That's exactly why you need professional management," Marcus said, exchanging a meaningful look with Jennifer. "Mom, you're not equipped to handle complex financial strategies, but Jennifer has connections with some of the best wealth management firms in the country." Wealth management. For a modest teacher's pension and life insurance policy. The grandiosity of their language revealed the grandiosity of their ambitions. "What would I need to do?" I asked, feigning nervous interest. Jennifer slid a document across the coffee table. "This is just a preliminary authorization that would allow our recommended advisors to review your current holdings and prepare a comprehensive financial plan. Nothing binding, just the first step toward securing your future." I picked up the document, recognizing immediately that it was far more than a preliminary authorization. Hidden in the legal language was permission for Jennifer's advisors to move my assets into investment vehicles that would generate substantial fees while potentially putting my principal at risk. "This looks so official," I said, setting it down without signing. "I think I should probably have a lawyer look at it first, don't you?" Marcus's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, you don't need to pay a lawyer to review a simple consultation agreement. We're family. We're just trying to help you." "Besides," Jennifer added smoothly, "the opportunities we've identified are time-sensitive. If you wait too long, these investment windows might close." Time pressure. The classic manipulation tactic for creating urgency around bad decisions. David's letter had prepared me for exactly this approach. "I understand your concern," I said, "but your father always told me never to sign anything without sleeping on it first. Maybe we could meet again next week after I've had time to think." The disappointment on their faces was unmistakable. They'd expected to leave with signed documents and immediate access to my accounts. Instead, they were facing delay and potential legal review. "Of course, Mom," Marcus said, his voice strained with forced patience. "We just don't want you to miss out on opportunities because of overthinking." After they left, I sat in my living room holding the unsigned document and marveling at the audacity of their scheme. They'd waltzed into my home planning to manipulate a grieving widow into surrendering control of her deceased husband's legacy. They'd calculated that my emotional state would override my judgment. They'd calculated wrong. But more importantly, they'd shown me exactly who they were when they thought I was powerless. Marcus wasn't just allowing Jennifer to exploit his mother. He was actively participating in the scheme. This wasn't a case of poor judgment or bad influence. This was calculated predation by my own son. Robert had been right about letting people reveal their true nature when they think you're vulnerable. Now I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and exactly how I needed to respond. The Grieving Widow Act was over. It was time for Catherine Winters to show her son what happened when you mistook kindness for weakness and love for stupidity. Monday morning arrived with crisp autumn clarity, and I woke up feeling more focused than I had since David's death. The weekend encounter with Marcus and Jennifer had crystallized something essential within me. I was no longer the confused, vulnerable widow they assumed I was. I was a woman with resources, intelligence, and most importantly, absolute clarity about what needed to be done. My first call was to James Morrison in Los Angeles. Despite the early hour on the West Coast, he answered immediately, as if he'd been expecting to hear from me. "Mrs. Winters, I trust your weekend meeting was illuminating?" More than you could imagine. Robert was absolutely right about letting people show their true nature. I need to accelerate our timeline and implement some additional strategies. I'm listening. Over the next hour, I outlined my plan. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his understanding of both the legal and psychological complexities involved. By the end of our conversation, we had established a framework that would accomplish multiple objectives: protecting my inheritance, creating consequences for Marcus's behavior, and establishing a foundation for meaningful change. "The beauty of your approach," Morrison said, "is that it offers redemption while ensuring justice. You're giving Marcus every opportunity to choose better behavior while making it clear that his current path leads nowhere good." Exactly. I don't want to destroy my son. I want to save him from what he's becoming. But I also won't enable his transformation into someone who would exploit his own mother's grief. After ending the call with Morrison, I contacted Dr. Elena Vasquez, a family therapist I'd worked with during my years at the Juvenile Center. Elena had helped countless families navigate the treacherous waters of money, power, and relationships. Her expertise would be crucial for what I was planning. "Catherine, I was so sorry to hear about David's passing. How are you holding up?" I explained the situation with Marcus and Jennifer, the funeral incident, and the attempted financial manipulation. Elena listened with the professional composure I remembered, but I could hear the concern in her voice. "What you're describing is unfortunately common when inheritance and family dynamics collide. The key is creating accountability without destroying relationships permanently. You want consequences that educate rather than simply punish. That's exactly what I'm hoping to achieve. I want Marcus to understand the impact of his choices while still having a path back to genuine family connection. Then we need to design interventions that address the behavior without attacking his fundamental worth as a person. Can you come in this week? I'd like to develop a comprehensive strategy with you." Tuesday afternoon found me in Elena's comfortable office, surrounded by the warm earth tones and carefully chosen artwork that made difficult conversations feel safer. Elena had reviewed the documentation I'd provided, David's letter, the financial records, and transcripts of my conversations with Marcus and Jennifer. "The pattern here is classic," Elena explained, pointing to her notes. "Marcus has been gradually conditioned to see your family's values as limitations rather than foundations. Jennifer represents what he believes is a more sophisticated worldview, one that prioritizes individual advancement over family loyalty. But how did it happen so quickly?" 2 years ago, Marcus was still the son who called every week and remembered our anniversary. Think about the technique of gradual conditioning. Jennifer likely started with small criticisms. Your house was charming but small. Your traditions were sweet but old-fashioned. Each criticism was followed by alternatives that positioned her as the solution to his limited upbringing. Elena showed me a diagram illustrating the psychological process. She systematically replaced his family identity with a new identity centered around her vision of success. The funeral incident wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was the logical culmination of 2 years of conditioning him to see you as his past, rather than his foundation. So how do I break that conditioning without becoming the controlling mother she's painted me as? By creating natural consequences that let Marcus experience the results of his choices without you being the obvious architect. You want him to discover the costs of his behavior through his own experience, not through your lectures or manipulations. Over the next 2 hours, Elena and I developed what she called a structured revelation plan. Instead of confronting Marcus directly about his behavior, I would create situations that allowed him to see the impact of his choices on others and, ultimately, on himself. The goal, Elena explained, is to help Marcus rediscover his own moral compass. Right now, Jennifer has convinced him that traditional values are obstacles to overcome. We need to show him the practical and emotional costs of abandoning those values. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected call from Sarah in Seattle. Her voice was tight with anger and disbelief. "Mom, you need to know what's happening up here. Alex's friend called him this morning with some disturbing information about Marcus and Jennifer." "What kind of information?" "They've been telling people in Portland that you're suffering from early-stage dementia and that they're having to manage your finances to protect you from making poor decisions." Jennifer apparently told someone at her dental office that it's tragic how grief can accelerate cognitive decline in older adults. The calculated cruelty of this lie took my breath away. They weren't just trying to manipulate me, they were systematically destroying my reputation to justify their takeover of my affairs. "There's more, Mom. Marcus contacted the juvenile center, where you used to work. He told them you've been struggling with memory issues since Dad's death, and suggested they might want to gently transition you out of any volunteer activities for your own well-being." My former workplace. Marcus had actually contacted my professional colleagues to spread lies about my mental competency. The violation felt almost as profound as his funeral behavior. "Sarah, I need you to document everything you're hearing. Names, dates, specific quotes if possible. This isn't just family drama anymore. This is a systematic campaign to undermine my credibility. Already on it, Alex is making calls to everyone we know in common with Marcus. We're going to track exactly how far this has spread." That evening, I received a visit from Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor. She knocked tentatively on my front door, holding a casserole dish and wearing an expression of deep concern. "Catherine, dear, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I brought you some dinner, but I also wanted to talk to you about something troubling." I invited her in, sensing this conversation would provide more evidence of Marcus and Jennifer's campaign. "I ran into Jennifer at the grocery store yesterday," Mrs. Patterson began carefully. "She seemed very concerned about you. She mentioned that you've been having trouble remembering things since David's passing, and that Marcus is worried about your ability to live independently." "Did she say anything specific?" Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. "She said you'd been calling Marcus at all hours, confused about basic things like paying bills or keeping appointments. She seemed genuinely worried, but something about the conversation felt wrong to me. You've always been one of the sharpest people I know." "What else did she say?" "She mentioned that they're looking into care options for you, possibly an assisted living facility that could provide the support you need during this difficult transition." She made it sound like Marcus was being very responsible, taking care of his mother's declining health. The audacity was breathtaking. They were preemptively explaining away any resistance I might offer to their financial schemes by painting me as cognitively impaired. If I objected to their investment strategies, it would be dismissed as confusion. If I sought legal advice, it would be seen as paranoia. They were systematically removing my credibility to smooth their path to my assets. Mrs. Patterson, I appreciate you telling me this. Did Jennifer say anything about timing? When these care arrangements might need to be made? She implied it was urgent. She said family sometimes has to make difficult decisions quickly when a loved one's condition is deteriorating rapidly. After Mrs. Patterson left, I sat in my kitchen processing the full scope of Marcus and Jennifer's strategy. They weren't just planning to manipulate me. They were laying the groundwork for a complete takeover. The dementia story provided cover for everything from financial control to living arrangements. If they could establish a narrative of my incompetence, they could justify any actions they took for my own good. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed I was the isolated, vulnerable widow their story described. They had no idea about Robert's inheritance or the resources I now had available. More importantly, they didn't understand that their lies had given me the perfect opportunity to let them reveal the full extent of their plans. Thursday morning, I called Marcus directly for the first time since the funeral. "Mom," he answered, his voice immediately shifting to a tone of patronizing concern. "How are you feeling?" "Jennifer mentioned she was worried about you when she saw Mrs. Patterson at the store." "I'm feeling confused about a lot of things lately," I said, infusing my voice with just the right amount of uncertainty. "The paperwork from the insurance company is so complicated, and I keep forgetting whether I've paid certain bills." That's exactly what Jennifer and I have been worried about. Grief can really affect cognitive function, especially at your age. We think it might be time to consider some additional support systems. Additional support systems. The euphemism was perfectly crafted to sound caring while meaning control. What kind of support systems? Well, Jennifer has researched some excellent assisted living communities that specialize in supporting people through difficult transitions. Places where you wouldn't have to worry about managing finances or household responsibilities. But I love this house, Marcus. Your father and I built our whole life here. I know, Mom, but sometimes we have to make practical decisions. The house is too big for you anyway, and maintaining it is probably adding to your stress. If we sold it, the proceeds could fund a really nice place where you'd have professional support and social activities. Sold? He wanted to sell the family home, the house where he'd grown up, where David had taught him to ride a bike in the driveway, where we'd celebrated every Christmas and birthday for 30 years. And the proceeds would conveniently be available for his management. "I suppose you're right," I said carefully. "But wouldn't something like that be expensive?" "That's the beauty of it, Mom. Between Dad's life insurance and the value of the house, there would be more than enough to cover a high-quality facility. Jennifer knows someone who specializes in these transitions. She could help us find the perfect place and handle all the financial arrangements." Jennifer would handle the financial arrangements? She's much better with that stuff than I am. And honestly, Mom, you don't need to worry about the details. We just want you to be safe and comfortable. Safe and comfortable. Under Jennifer's financial management. In a facility that would isolate me from friends and neighbors who might question the narrative of my declining competence. When would something like this happen? Jennifer thinks we should move quickly. The longer we wait, the more overwhelming it becomes for everyone involved. She's already identified a few places we could visit this weekend. This weekend. They were planning to have me touring assisted living facilities within days of establishing their dementia narrative. The speed of their timeline revealed both their confidence and their desperation. "That sounds wise," I said. "But Marcus, I'm worried about the financial aspects. Shouldn't I have a lawyer review everything before making such big decisions?" "Mom, lawyers just complicate things and charge enormous fees. Jennifer's contact is a fiduciary specialist who works specifically with families in transition. She can handle everything much more efficiently than a traditional attorney. A fiduciary specialist working with Jennifer's contact, another layer of their scheme designed to legitimize their control while bypassing independent legal oversight. "If you think that's best," I said meekly. "You know I trust your judgment." "Good. Jennifer will set up the appointments for this weekend. Don't worry about anything, Mom. We're going to take care of everything." After hanging up, I immediately called Elena to report on the conversation. Her reaction was swift and concerned. "Catherine, they're moving much faster than we anticipated. The timeline they're proposing suggests they're either more desperate than we realized or more confident in their ability to control the situation. What do you think is driving the urgency?" "Probably both factors. If they genuinely believe you're experiencing cognitive decline, they may worry that delay could complicate their plans. But there might also be external pressure we're not aware of. Debts, commitments, or opportunities that require immediate access to capital." That afternoon, I received an unexpected insight into their motivation. Sarah called with information from her continued investigation into Marcus and Jennifer's activities. "Mom, Alex's friend did some more digging. Marcus apparently borrowed heavily against his house to invest in some kind of cryptocurrency venture that Jennifer convinced him was a sure thing. The investment went bad, and now he's facing a balloon payment on the loan that's due next month." "How much money are we talking about?" "Close to $200,000. If he can't make the payment, he could lose his house." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Marcus's urgent need for financial control wasn't just about greed, it was about desperation. Jennifer had convinced him to risk his home on a speculative investment, and now they needed immediate access to substantial capital to avoid financial ruin. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "Jennifer apparently quit her job at the dental office 3 weeks ago. She told people she was transitioning to financial consulting and would be managing investment portfolios for select clients. Select clients meaning people she could manipulate into giving her control of their assets." "That's what it sounds like. Mom, I think you're their first target, but probably not their only planned victim. They're treating this like a business model." The conversation with Sarah crystallized my understanding of what I was truly dealing with. This wasn't a family dispute or even simple greed. Marcus and Jennifer had developed a systematic approach to exploiting vulnerable people, starting with his own mother. They'd tested their strategy on me, refined their techniques, and were preparing to scale their operation. But they had chosen the wrong first target. Friday morning, I implemented the next phase of my plan. I called Jennifer directly, bypassing Marcus entirely. "Mrs. Winters," she answered smoothly. "Marcus told me about your conversation yesterday. I'm so glad you're open to getting the support you need. I've been thinking about what Marcus said, and I'm ready to move forward. But I have some concerns about the financial arrangements." "Of course. What kind of concerns?" "Well, I have more assets than Marcus realizes. David was very private about our investments, and there are some accounts that Marcus doesn't know about. I'm worried about how to handle those in this transition." The interest in Jennifer's voice was immediate and unmistakable. "What kind of additional assets?" "David had some investments through his work that I never fully understood. Stock options, retirement accounts, things like that. The paperwork suggests they're worth quite a bit, but I'm not sure how to access them or whether they should be part of the assisted living funding." "How much are we talking about?" "I'm not entirely sure. The statements show numbers like 500,000, but I don't know if that's the current value or what David originally invested." I could almost hear Jennifer's mind racing. $500,000 in hidden assets would significantly expand the scope of their scheme and provide more than enough capital to solve Marcus's immediate financial crisis. Mrs. Winters, this is exactly the kind of situation where professional asset management becomes crucial. Those investments could be earning much better returns if they're properly managed. But I don't even know where all the paperwork is. David kept everything in his office, and I haven't had the courage to go through it all. That's completely understandable. Would it help if I came over this afternoon to help you organize the documents? I have experience with complex asset transitions. Would you? That would be such a relief. I've been so overwhelmed by all the paperwork. Absolutely. I'll bring Marcus, and we can get everything sorted out together. After ending the call, I spent the morning preparing for their visit. I created a collection of realistic-looking financial documents using information from David's actual accounts, but inflating the values significantly. I planted these documents in strategic locations throughout David's home office, making them appear to be genuine records that a grieving widow might have overlooked. Most importantly, I set up a recording system that would capture everything they said and did during their search through David's papers. Elena had recommended documenting their behavior as evidence of their intentions and methods. Marcus and Jennifer arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, both dressed as if they were attending a business meeting. Jennifer carried a large tote bag that I suspected contained document organizers and other tools for their asset inventory. "Mom, Jennifer is going to help us get all of Dad's paperwork organized," Marcus said, his voice full of false concern. "We want to make sure nothing important gets overlooked." "Oh, thank you both," I said, leading them to David's office. "I've been afraid to touch anything in here. It still feels like his space." David's office was exactly as he'd left it, with one crucial addition: the fabricated documents I'd strategically placed among his genuine papers. Jennifer's eyes immediately began scanning the room, cataloging the filing cabinets, desk drawers, and document boxes with professional efficiency. "Why don't you sit down and relax, Mrs. Winters?" Jennifer suggested. "Marcus and I can handle the organization. We'll just sort everything into categories and help you understand what you have." I settled into David's reading chair, playing the role of the grateful but overwhelmed widow, while Jennifer and Marcus began their systematic search through 35 years of financial records. Within minutes, Jennifer had located the first of my planted documents, a statement showing a substantial investment account at a major brokerage firm. "Marcus, look at this," she said, her voice carefully controlled but unmistakably excited. "Your father had a significant portfolio at Merrill Lynch." Marcus examined the document with growing amazement. "Mom, did you know about this account?" "I think David mentioned something about investments through his work, but I never paid attention to the details. Is it important?" "Important?" Jennifer laughed. "Mrs. Winters, this statement shows over $400,000 in diversified investments. These assets could generate substantial income if they're properly managed." Over the next hour, they discovered each of my planted documents with increasing excitement. A retirement account worth $300,000, stock options valued at $200,000, a certificate of deposit that had been earning minimal interest for years but could be reinvested for much better returns. "Mrs. Winters," Jennifer said, spreading the documents across David's desk like a treasure map. "You have over $1 million in assets that aren't being properly utilized. This completely changes the scope of your financial planning needs." $1 million? I gasped, playing my role perfectly. "That can't be right. We were just regular middle-class people." "Your husband was very conservative with his investments," Marcus explained. "But conservative doesn't mean optimal. Jennifer can show you how to restructure these assets to generate much better returns." Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. "The key is consolidating everything under professional management. Right now, you have money scattered across multiple institutions, earning suboptimal returns and creating unnecessary complexity." "What would that involve?" "First, we'd need to establish a comprehensive asset management agreement that gives our financial team the authority to optimize your holdings. Then we'd consolidate everything into a unified investment strategy designed to maximize both growth and income." Asset management agreement. The same type of document they'd tried to get me to sign the previous weekend, but now expanded to cover the fictitious $1 million portfolio they believed they'd discovered. That sounds complicated, I said uncertainly. Are you sure I need professional management? Maybe I should just leave everything the way David had it. Mrs. Winters, Jennifer said patiently, leaving money in conservative investments during inflationary periods is essentially guaranteed to lose purchasing power over time. Your husband did a good job accumulating assets, but now you need a strategy designed for wealth preservation and growth. Besides, Marcus added, professional management would take all the worry off your shoulders. You wouldn't have to think about investment decisions or market fluctuations. Jennifer's team would handle everything. For the next 30 minutes, they outlined their expanded scheme with increasing boldness. The assisted living facility was still part of the plan, but now it would be funded by optimizing my investment returns rather than selling the house. My assets would be consolidated under their management, generating fees that would compensate them for their expertise while providing me with steady income for my care needs. When could we start this process? I asked, maintaining my facade of confused gratitude. Ideally, we'd like to move quickly, Jennifer replied. Market conditions are favorable right now, but that could change. If we could get the authorization, paperwork signed by Monday, we could begin the consolidation process immediately. Monday. They wanted signed documents giving them control of $1 million in assets within 3 days of discovering those assets existed. I suppose that makes sense, I said slowly. But shouldn't I have my own lawyer review everything first? Marcus and Jennifer exchanged a quick glance that my hidden recording system captured perfectly. Mom, we talked about this before. Lawyers just slow things down and charge enormous fees. Jennifer's team includes legal specialists who can handle all the documentation much more efficiently. Plus, Jennifer added, the opportunities we've identified are time-sensitive. Delay could mean missing optimal entry points for several of these investments. Time pressure again. The same manipulation tactic they'd used the previous weekend, but now amplified by the larger stakes involved. I understand, I said. But this is such a big decision. What if I need to access my money for unexpected expenses? That's the beauty of proper asset management, Jennifer explained. Your money would actually be more accessible than it is now because it would be generating regular income streams. Plus, you'd have professional oversight to ensure you're not making emotional decisions during stressful periods. Professional oversight to ensure I wasn't making emotional decisions. The euphemism for preventing me from accessing my own money without their approval was almost insulting in its transparency. If you think it's best, I said, I trust your judgment. You've both been so helpful during this difficult time. We care about you, Mom, Marcus said, and for a moment I almost believed he meant it. We just want to make sure you're protected and comfortable. After they left, I spent the evening reviewing the recordings of their visit with Elena via video call. Her analysis was both comprehensive and disturbing. What you've documented is a textbook case of financial exploitation, Elena explained. The speed with which they escalated their scheme after discovering the additional assets demonstrates that this isn't impulsive behavior, it's calculated predation. What concerns me most is how natural it seemed to Marcus. 2 years ago, he would have been horrified by this kind of manipulation. Now he's actively participating. That's the most tragic aspect of what Jennifer has accomplished. She hasn't just recruited Marcus as an accomplice. She's convinced him that exploiting his mother is a form of caring for her. Elena's words crystallized something I'd been struggling to understand. Marcus wasn't just being influenced by Jennifer. He was being systematically reprogrammed to see exploitation as protection and manipulation as love. The question now, Elena continued, is whether the Marcus you raised still exists somewhere beneath the person Jennifer has created, and whether he can be reached before it's too late. Saturday morning brought the moment of truth. I called Morrison in Los Angeles to confirm that everything was in place for the final phase of my plan. All the legal structures are established, Morrison confirmed. The foundation is operational. The trust accounts are funded, and your attorney in Portland has all the documentation he needs. When you're ready to proceed, everything will be implemented simultaneously. And you're confident about the legal protections? Absolutely. Your plan creates consequences while preserving opportunities for redemption. Most importantly, it protects your assets while giving Marcus every chance to choose a different path. That afternoon, I made the call that would set everything in motion. Jennifer, I've made my decision. I'm ready to sign the management agreement on Monday. That's wonderful, Mrs. Winters. I knew you'd see the wisdom in professional asset management. But I have one condition. I want to understand exactly what's happening to my money. Can we meet at your office so I can see how a professional financial management company operates? There was a brief pause. Actually, we usually handle these transactions at the client's home for convenience. It's more comfortable for everyone involved. I appreciate that, but I'd feel more confident seeing your business operation. After all, I'm trusting you with everything David worked for his entire life. Another pause, longer this time. Of course, let me give you the address of our downtown office. I wrote down the address she provided, knowing it was almost certainly fake. Jennifer was scrambling to maintain her professional facade while knowing she had no actual office or legitimate business operation. I'll see you Monday at 10 o'clock, I said. And Jennifer? Thank you for taking such good care of Marcus and me during this difficult time. It means everything to have family we can trust. The irony of that last statement would become clear to her very soon. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often accompanies moments of significant change. I dressed carefully in my best suit, applied makeup with precision, and prepared for a confrontation that would determine not just my financial future, but the possibility of saving my son from the person he was becoming. At 9:30, I arrived at the address Jennifer had provided, a generic office building downtown with temporary office rentals and mailbox services. As I'd suspected, Jennifer had no permanent business operation, just a hastily arranged facade, designed to legitimize her financial manipulation schemes. Marcus and Jennifer were waiting in the lobby, both dressed in business attire and carrying expensive leather portfolios. They greeted me with the warm professionalism of people who believed they were about to complete the most lucrative transaction of their careers. Mom, Jennifer's office is on the 10th floor, Marcus said, guiding me toward the elevators. She's got everything prepared for the signing. The office Jennifer had rented was a small conference room with generic corporate furniture and a view of the parking garage. She'd arranged documents on the table and set up a professional-looking presentation. But the temporary nature of the space was obvious to anyone paying attention. Mrs. Winters, welcome to our downtown location, Jennifer said smoothly. This is where we handle our most important client transactions. For the next hour, Jennifer presented her comprehensive asset management proposal with impressive polish. The documents looked professional, the investment strategies sounded sophisticated, and the projected returns were enticing. If I had been the confused, grieving widow they believed I was, I might have been convinced by the presentation. Everything looks wonderful, I said when she finished. But before I sign anything, I have some questions about your company's background and credentials. Of course. What would you like to know? Well, I'd like to see your business license, your professional certifications, and maybe some references from other clients you've helped. Jennifer's confident expression flickered almost imperceptibly. Those documents are at our main office. This is just our client meeting location. I see. And where is your main office? Seattle. We serve clients throughout the Pacific Northwest, from our headquarters there. A lie, of course. Sarah had already confirmed that no financial management company matching Jennifer's description existed in Seattle. That's interesting, I said. Because I had my daughter Sarah research your company, and she couldn't find any record of your business registration in Washington state. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus looked confused, while Jennifer's professional facade began to crack. There might be some confusion about our corporate structure, Jennifer said carefully. We operate under several different business entities. I'm sure that's true. But Marcus, I'm concerned about trusting our family's financial future to a company that doesn't seem to exist in any official records. Mom, what are you talking about? Marcus asked, his voice tight with growing anxiety. Jennifer has been completely transparent about her business operations. Has she? Marcus, when is the last time you visited Jennifer's office in Seattle? When have you met any of her colleagues or seen any evidence of her professional credentials? Marcus looked to Jennifer for answers, but her composure was rapidly deteriorating. Mrs. Winters, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Jennifer said. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting for when you're feeling less confused about the details. I'm not confused at all. In fact, I'm seeing things more clearly than I have in months. I opened my purse and pulled out a folder containing documentation that Morrison had prepared for this moment. For instance, I'm clear about the fact that you and Marcus have been telling people in Portland that I'm suffering from dementia. I'm clear about the fact that Marcus borrowed $200,000 against his house for a cryptocurrency investment that failed. And I'm clear about the fact that you quit your job 3 weeks ago to pursue what you call financial consulting. Jennifer went pale, while Marcus looked like he'd been physically struck. How do you know about the loan? Marcus whispered. I know about a lot of things, son. I know that you introduced your girlfriend as your new mother at your father's funeral. I know that you've been planning to put me in assisted living and sell the family home. I know that you've been spreading lies about my mental competency to justify taking control of my finances. Mom, you don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. What I don't understand is how the son I raised could participate in a scheme to exploit his own mother's grief. Jennifer had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Mrs. Winters, I think your emotional state is affecting your judgment. Maybe Marcus should take you home so you can rest. My emotional state is fine, Jennifer, but yours is about to get much worse. I pulled out the second set of documents Morrison had prepared. You see, while you were planning to steal what you thought was David's modest estate, you missed something important. David's brother Robert died 2 months ago and left me his entire fortune. $18 million to be precise. The shock on their faces was worth every moment of the charade I'd been performing. That's impossible, Jennifer stammered. You would have mentioned something that significant. Why would I mention it to people who were planning to rob me? Robert left very specific instructions about testing the character of people around me before revealing the inheritance. Congratulations. You both failed spectacularly. Marcus found his voice first. Mom, if this is true, why didn't you tell me? We're family. Are we, Marcus? Because family members don't spread lies about their mother's mental health. Family. Members don't try to manipulate their mother's grief for financial gain. Family members don't introduce their girlfriends as their new mothers at their father's funeral. That was taken out of context. Was it? Was trying to get me to sign over my assets also taken out of context? Was planning to put me in assisted living against my will also a misunderstanding? Jennifer had been silent during this exchange, clearly calculating her options. Finally, she spoke with desperate precision. Mrs. Winters, I think you're misremembering some of our conversations. We were only trying to help you through a difficult transition. Really? Because I have recordings of every conversation we've had since David's funeral, including yesterday's meeting where you inventoried my assets and planned your takeover strategy. The blood drained from Jennifer's face. You recorded us? I documented everything. The lies you've told about my mental health, the financial schemes you've developed, the timeline for gaining control of my assets. It's all admissible evidence of attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. You can't prove any of this, Jennifer said, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can, and I have. My attorney has already filed preliminary documentation with the district attorney's office. Whether this becomes a criminal matter depends entirely on your choices going forward. The room fell silent except for the sound of Jennifer's rapid breathing and Marcus's whispered, oh God, under his breath. But here's what's interesting, I continued. Despite everything you've done, I'm willing to offer you both a choice. You can continue down the path you've chosen, in which case you'll face the full legal consequences of your actions. Or you can acknowledge what you've done and work to make amends. What kind of amends? Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. That depends on whether you're asking because you genuinely want to change or because you're afraid of going to jail. I stood up, gathering my documents with deliberate calm. Here's what's going to happen. Jennifer, you're going to return to your apartment and think very carefully about the choices that brought you to this moment. You have 48 hours to decide whether you want to face criminal charges for attempted financial exploitation, or whether you prefer to disappear from Marcus's life permanently. Jennifer opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. Marcus, you have the same 48 hours to decide who you want to be. The son who would exploit his mother's grief, or the man your father believed you could become. But understand this. Your choice will determine not just our relationship going forward, but whether you face criminal prosecution for your role in this scheme. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final statement. The boy I raised would never have participated in something like this. The question is whether that boy still exists somewhere inside the man you've become. 48 hours. Marcus, use them wisely. As I left the building, I felt something I hadn't experienced since David's death, the profound satisfaction of standing up for my own worth and dignity. The grieving victim was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood her own power and wasn't afraid to use it. The real test would come in the next 48 hours, when Marcus would have to choose between the person Jennifer had convinced him to become and the person David and I had raised him to be. But regardless of his choice, I had already won. The most important victory. I had refused to be a victim and reclaimed my own strength. The transformation was complete. Now it was time to see if my son was capable of his own transformation, or if some relationships are too broken to repair. The 48 hours that followed my confrontation with Marcus and Jennifer passed with the slow intensity of watching a storm approach. I spent Tuesday morning at my kitchen table, not anxiously waiting for my son's decision, but methodically planning the next chapter of my life, regardless of his choice. The woman who had emerged from David's death and Robert's unexpected gift was someone I was still getting to know, someone who understood that her worth wasn't determined by other people's choices. Dr. Elena Vasquez called at 9 o'clock to check on my emotional state after the confrontation. Catherine, how are you processing everything that happened yesterday? That level of revelation and confrontation can be emotionally exhausting, even when you're prepared for it. Honestly, Elena, I feel more at peace than I have since David died. For months, I've been questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was being too harsh in my judgment of Marcus's behavior. Yesterday confirmed that my instincts were correct. That validation is important. But how are you preparing for whatever comes next? I looked out my kitchen window at the maple tree David had planted when Marcus was born, its leaves now brilliant orange against the October sky. I've realized something profound over the past few weeks. I spent 31 years trying to be the perfect mother, believing that unconditional love meant accepting any behavior without consequences. But unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional enablement. You can love someone completely while refusing to participate in their destruction of themselves and others. Elena's voice carried approval. That's a crucial distinction that many parents struggle to understand. What does that realization mean for your relationship with Marcus going forward? It means that whether he chooses redemption or continues down his current path, I'm going to be fine. I've learned that my happiness and dignity don't depend on his choices. That's incredibly liberating. Tuesday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah had driven down from Seattle, arriving unannounced with determination written across her face. "Mom, I couldn't stay away knowing what was happening. How did yesterday go?" I walked her through the entire confrontation, from Jennifer's fake office to Marcus's shocked realization that his financial schemes had been exposed. Sarah listened with growing amazement, occasionally shaking her head at the audacity of their plans. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. 6 months ago you would have made excuses for Marcus's behavior and tried to find ways to help him despite his cruelty. Now you're holding him accountable while still offering him a path to redemption. Your father's death taught me something essential about life's priorities. We don't have unlimited time to waste on people who choose to see us as obstacles, rather than blessings, even when those people are our own children." "Have you heard anything from Marcus yet?" "Nothing. But I'm not sitting by the phone hoping for his call. I'm planning the life I want to live, with or without him in it." That evening, Sarah and I went through David's belongings together, a task I'd been avoiding since his death. In his closet, we found the leather jacket he'd worn on our first date, still carrying the faint scent of his cologne. In his desk, we discovered a folder labeled "For Catherine," containing letters he'd written but never given me, notes of appreciation for moments both large and small throughout our marriage. "Mom, look at this," Sarah said, holding up a letter dated just 3 months before David's diagnosis. "He wrote about watching you help Mrs. Patterson with her garden after her husband died, and how proud he was that you always saw helping others as a privilege rather than a burden." Reading David's words about my character gave me perspective on the transformation I'd undergone. The woman who helped grieving neighbors hadn't disappeared. She'd simply learned to extend that same compassion to herself. Wednesday morning arrived with crisp clarity and no word from Marcus. At exactly 48 hours after our confrontation, I called Morrison in Los Angeles to implement the next phase of my plan. "James, it's time to move forward. Marcus has made his choice through his silence." "I'm sorry, Catherine. I was hoping he would surprise us." "I wasn't. His silence tells me everything I need to know about his priorities. Let's proceed with establishing the foundation." Over the next 2 hours, Morrison walked me through the final details of the Catherine and David Winters Foundation for Family Support, a charitable organization dedicated to helping families in crisis. The foundation would provide counseling, services for families dealing with financial exploitation, legal assistance for elderly adults facing manipulation by relatives, and educational programs about recognizing and preventing family-based fraud. "The foundation will be funded initially with $5 million from your inheritance," Morrison explained, "but it's structured to accept additional donations and to generate its own revenue through investment returns." "And the educational component?" "We've partnered with family therapy organizations nationwide to develop curriculum about healthy family financial relationships. Your story, appropriately anonymized, will be part of the case studies used to train counselors and legal advocates. The idea that my experience could help protect other families from similar exploitation felt like transforming pain into purpose. David would have loved knowing that our tragedy was becoming a source of healing for others. Wednesday afternoon brought a knock on my front door that I'd been expecting but still dreaded. Marcus stood on my doorstep, alone for the first time since David's funeral. He looked exhausted, older somehow, as if the past 48 hours had aged him years. "Mom, can we talk?" I invited him in, noting immediately that he wasn't carrying any flowers, cards, or other tokens of apology. His empty hands spoke as clearly as his words would. "I've been thinking about what you said on Monday," he began. settling uncomfortably on the couch where he'd once watched cartoons as a child. About having 48 hours to decide who I want to be. And what? Have you decided? I think you're overreacting to a misunderstanding. Jennifer and I were genuinely trying to help you navigate a complicated financial situation. If our approach seemed aggressive, it's because we were worried about you making decisions while you're still grieving. I felt something settle in. My chest. Not disappointment, because I'd prepared for this possibility, but a kind of sad finality. So you're saying that spreading lies about my mental health was helping me? That planning to sell my home and put me in assisted living against my will was protecting me? That introducing Jennifer as your new mother at your father's funeral was a misunderstanding? The funeral thing was insensitive, I'll admit that, but everything else was just us trying to look out for your best interests. Marcus, I recorded your conversations about inventorying my assets and taking control of my finances. I have documentation of your plans to liquidate my investments for your management fees. Are you claiming that was also in my best interest? He shifted uncomfortably. Those recordings were taken without our consent. That's probably illegal. It's not illegal in Oregon to record conversations in your own home when you suspect criminal activity. But that's beside the point. The point is that you're sitting here trying to justify exploiting your own mother instead of acknowledging what you've done. I'm not exploiting anyone. Jennifer has real financial expertise, and we were offering you legitimate investment opportunities. Jennifer quit her job as a dental hygienist 3 weeks ago and has no financial credentials whatsoever. The office where we met on Monday was a temporary rental. The investment firm you claim to represent doesn't exist. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a defensive edge that reminded me of the teenager who'd been caught breaking curfew. Even if some details weren't perfectly accurate, our intentions were good. We were trying to help you maximize your assets instead of letting them sit in conservative investments. Whose assets, Marcus? Your cryptocurrency investment that lost you $200,000. Were you trying to maximize those assets? Too? His face flushed red. How did you find out about that? The same way I found out about everything else you've been hiding. The question is why you thought exploiting your mother was an appropriate solution to your financial problems. I wasn't exploiting you. I was trying to create a win-win situation where your money could generate better returns while helping me get back on my feet. Using my money to solve your financial crisis without my knowledge or consent isn't a win-win situation, Marcus. It's theft. Sophisticated theft, but theft nonetheless. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where he'd once pressed his face against the glass waiting for the school bus. Fine. Maybe our approach wasn't perfect. Maybe we made some mistakes in how we presented things. But you're acting like we're criminals when we were just trying to solve problems. You were trying to solve your problems using my assets while lying to me about my mental competency. That's exactly what criminal financial exploitation looks like. So what do you want from me? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the funeral. I'm sorry about the financial stuff. I'm sorry about whatever else you think we did wrong. The apology was empty, transactional, devoid of any genuine understanding of the harm he'd caused. It reminded me of a child apologizing to avoid punishment while planning to repeat the same behavior. Marcus, do you understand why what you did was wrong? Or are you just sorry you got caught? I don't see the difference. And there it was. The fundamental absence of moral understanding that Jennifer had cultivated and that Marcus had embraced. He genuinely couldn't distinguish between remorse for harmful actions and regret about consequences. The difference, I said quietly, is everything. A person who understands why their actions were wrong can change their behavior. A person who's only sorry about getting caught will just become more careful about not getting caught next time. Look, Mom, I said I was sorry. What more do you want? I want my son back, the boy who would have been horrified by the idea of exploiting anyone's vulnerability, especially his own mother's grief. But I'm beginning to understand that boy doesn't exist anymore. That's not fair. People change as they mature. Just because I don't do everything exactly the way you and Dad taught me doesn't mean I've become a bad person. You're right that people change as they mature, but maturation typically involves developing stronger moral judgment, not weaker. The Marcus Y. raised would never have participated in financial fraud, regardless of how desperate his situation became. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold calculation masked as wounded innocence. You know what, Mom? Maybe the problem isn't that I've changed. Maybe the problem is that you've never accepted that I'm an adult who can make his own decisions about his relationships and his finances. This has nothing to do with accepting your adulthood, Marcus. This has to do with you choosing to commit fraud against your own mother. Fraud? That's a pretty strong accusation. I hope you're prepared to prove it in court if you're planning to throw around words like that. The implicit threat in his words crystallized everything I needed to know about who my son had become. He wasn't expressing remorse or seeking forgiveness. He was calculating whether I had sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges and warning me about the legal battle I would face if I tried. You're threatening me? I'm just pointing out that accusing people of crimes they didn't commit can have legal consequences. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 31 years of maternal love and sacrifice settling into a final understanding. Marcus, I want you to leave my house now. Mom, don't be dramatic. We can work this out if you're willing to be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm reasonably concluding that the son I loved and raised died sometime over the past 2 years, and the person standing in my living room is a stranger who happens to share his DNA. You're going to regret this attitude when you're old and need someone to take care of you. Another threat, this one focused on my future vulnerability. Marcus was essentially promising to abandon me in my old age unless I accepted his financial exploitation now. I'll take my chances with strangers, Marcus. They're unlikely to treat me worse than my own son just did. He walked toward the door, then turned back with one final attempt at manipulation. Jennifer was right about you. She said you'd rather be a victim than accept help from people who care about you. Jennifer doesn't care about me, Marcus, and neither do you. If you did, you would never have participated in a scheme to exploit my grief for financial gain. Fine, have it your way, but don't expect me to come running when you realize you need family. I have family. I have Sarah, who drove 5 hours to support me through this crisis. I have friends and neighbors who've shown me more genuine care than my own son. You're not family, Marcus. You're just someone who used to be family before you chose money over love. After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, not crying or raging, but simply acknowledging the finality of what had just occurred. The son I had loved for 31 years was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and couldn't respect. That loss was profound, but it was also liberating. Sarah found me there an hour later, still processing the conversation. How did it go with Marcus? He made his choice. The same choice he's been making for the past 2 years. Jennifer and money over family and values. I'm sorry, Mom. I know how much you hoped I did hope. But hope without boundaries becomes enablement. And enablement without consequences becomes participation in destruction. I'm done participating in Marcus's destruction of himself and others. That evening, Sarah and I cooked dinner, together in the kitchen where David and I had prepared thousands of meals over the years. As we worked, I found myself talking about the future with genuine excitement for the first time since David's death. The foundation will allow me to help. Families avoid what we went through, I explained, stirring the pasta sauce David had taught me to make. But beyond that, I'm thinking about going back to school. Back to school? Mom, you're 58. Exactly. I could have 25 good years ahead of me. Why not spend them learning new things and pursuing dreams I put aside when I was focused on raising children? What would you study? Family psychology, maybe. Or social work administration. I want to understand how families can be torn apart by money and how they can be healed through proper intervention. Sarah smiled, and I could see David's optimism reflected in her expression. Dad would love knowing that you're turning this terrible experience into something that helps others. Your father believed that every crisis contains the seeds of transformation. I'm finally understanding what he meant. Thursday morning brought a call from Dr. Elena with news that would reshape my understanding of Marcus's situation. Catherine, I've been thinking about your son's behavior, and I'd like to share some insights from my work with families experiencing financial exploitation. I'm listening. What Marcus exhibited during your conversation yesterday, the inability to distinguish between genuine remorse and strategic apology, the threats when confronted with consequences, the reframing of exploitation as help. These aren't just character flaws. They're symptoms of systematic psychological conditioning. Conditioning by Jennifer? Conditioning by someone, yes. The Marcus you raised is likely still there, but he's been buried under layers of rationalization and manipulation. The question is whether that conditioning can be reversed. How would that even be possible? He's had 2 years to become this person. Actually, that timeline gives me hope. 2 years isn't long enough for fundamental personality change in a healthy adult. What's more likely is that Marcus has been systematically isolated from his moral framework and convinced to adopt Jennifer's value system as his own. Elena's words sparked something I hadn't felt since Monday's confrontation, a flicker of hope for my son's redemption. What would it take to reverse that kind of conditioning? Complete separation from the influencing party, intensive therapy to help him recognize the manipulation techniques that were used on him, and time to rediscover his own moral compass without external pressure. And if he's unwilling to seek that kind of help, then the conditioning becomes permanent, and the person he's become replaces the person he was. After ending the call, I spent the morning wrestling with Elena's information. Was I obligated to make one more attempt to save my son from Jennifer's influence? Or would that effort simply enable his continued poor choices? The answer came in an unexpected form. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door carrying an envelope that had been delivered to her house by mistake. Catherine, dear, this came to my address, but it's clearly intended for you. The envelope contained a handwritten letter with no return address. Inside, I found 2 pages of careful writing in handwriting I didn't immediately recognize. Mrs. Winters, the letter began. My name is Amanda Phillips, and I dated Marcus for 3 years before he met Jennifer. I hope you'll forgive me for reaching out, but I felt I needed to warn you about what's happening to your son. Amanda went on to describe the Marcus she had known. Kind, family-oriented, generous to a fault. She detailed the gradual changes that had occurred after he began dating Jennifer, starting with small criticisms of his family and lifestyle and escalating to complete rejection of his previous values. Jennifer has a pattern, Amanda wrote. I've done some research since Marcus and I broke up, and I found 2 other men she dated before him. In each case, she identified their financial vulnerabilities and convinced them to see their families as obstacles to overcome rather than relationships to cherish. One of them ended up estranged from his entire family after she convinced him they were holding him back from his potential. The letter continued with details about Jennifer's methods, how she created financial crises that made her targets desperate, how she positioned herself as the solution to problems she had helped create, how she systematically replaced their support networks with her own influence. The Marcus you're dealing with now isn't the real Marcus, Amanda concluded. He's a version of himself that Jennifer created for her own purposes. I don't know if he can be saved, but I thought you should know that the son you remember really did exist, and that his transformation wasn't entirely his fault. Amanda's letter changed everything. Elena's clinical assessment now had real-world validation. Marcus wasn't just making poor choices. He was the victim of systematic psychological manipulation that had convinced him to see exploitation as love and family as limitation. But that understanding raised a new question. Was I strong enough to try to save someone who had chosen to victimize me? Did I have any obligation to rescue my son from the consequences of his own choices? The answer came that afternoon in a conversation with my longtime friend Margaret, who had dealt with her daughter's addiction recovery several years earlier. Catherine, the hardest thing I learned during Lisa's addiction was the difference between helping someone and enabling them. Helping someone means creating conditions that encourage healthy choices. Enabling someone means removing the consequences that might motivate them to change. But what if the person is genuinely a victim of manipulation rather than just making poor choices? Then helping them means addressing the manipulation while still maintaining consequences for the harm they've caused. You don't excuse destructive behavior just because there are underlying causes for it. Margaret's wisdom provided the framework I needed. I could acknowledge that Marcus was a victim of Jennifer's manipulation while still holding him accountable for his participation in that manipulation. Redemption was possible, but it had to be earned through genuine change rather than granted as a gift. Friday morning, I called Marcus for the first time since our confrontation. "Mom?" His voice carried surprise and wariness. "Marcus, I've learned some things about your relationship with Jennifer that I think you need to know. I don't want to hear any more criticism of Jennifer. We've been through this. This isn't criticism. This is information about a pattern of behavior that you're part of, whether you realize it or not." I told him about Amanda's letter, about Jennifer's history with other men, about the systematic nature of the psychological conditioning he'd experienced. I spoke without emotion, presenting facts rather than accusations. When I finished, Marcus was silent for nearly a minute. "Even if some of that is true," he said finally, "it doesn't change the fact that Jennifer and I are together now and planning a future." "What kind of future, Marcus? One where you're estranged from your family, bankrupt from failed investments, and dependent on schemes to exploit vulnerable people?" "Jennifer isn't exploiting anyone. She's helping me see opportunities that my upbringing prevented me from recognizing." "Your upbringing prevented you from recognizing opportunities to commit fraud." "It prevented me from understanding that sometimes you have to be aggressive about pursuing financial security. You and Dad were always so conservative, so willing to accept limitations." There it was, Jennifer's voice speaking through my son's mouth. The complete rejection of the values David and I had modeled in favor of an ideology that prioritized individual gain over family loyalty. "Marcus, I'm going to make you an offer, but it comes with conditions that aren't negotiable." "What kind of offer?" "I'll help you save your house from foreclosure. I'll pay off the $200,000 you borrowed for the cryptocurrency investment. But only if you agree to separate from Jennifer completely and enter intensive therapy to address the psychological manipulation you've experienced." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had been disconnected. "You want me to break up with Jennifer to get your money?" "I want you to break free from someone who has convinced you to see your family as obstacles and exploitation as opportunity. The money is just a tool to make that choice financially possible. And if I don't agree to your conditions, then you face the consequences of your choices without my intervention. The house gets foreclosed, your credit is destroyed, and you continue down a path that leads to criminal prosecution for financial fraud. You're trying to control my life. I'm offering you an opportunity to reclaim your life. There's a difference. I need to think about it. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer expires, and you're on your own." I hung up, knowing I had done everything possible to create a path for Marcus's redemption while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Whether he took that path would reveal whether the son I had raised still existed beneath the person Jennifer had created. Saturday evening came without a call from Marcus. At exactly 24 hours after our conversation, I sent him a brief text message. "Time's up. I hope you find peace with your choices." Sunday morning, I woke up feeling something I hadn't experienced since David's diagnosis: genuine excitement about the future. The Catherine who had spent her life accommodating other people's dysfunction was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and refused to compromise it for anyone. I called Morrison to finalize the foundation's launch, and Elena to begin developing our family therapy curriculum. I scheduled meetings with local universities about pursuing graduate studies in psychology. I planned trips to places David and I had always dreamed of visiting but never prioritized. Most importantly, I started writing. The story of my transformation from victim to victor, from enabler to boundary setter, from someone whose worth was determined by others' treatment to someone who knew her own value independent of external validation. 3 weeks later, I received a call that would provide the final piece of my story's resolution. It was Amanda Phillips, the young woman who had written to warn me about Jennifer's pattern of manipulation. "Mrs. Winters, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I thought you should know what's happened with Marcus and Jennifer." "What's happened?" "They broke up. Apparently Jennifer found another target, a recent widower with substantial assets who's even more vulnerable than Marcus was. She moved on to her next scheme without any warning." "How is Marcus handling it?" "Not well. He's been calling me, asking if we can talk. I think he's starting to realize what really happened to him over the past 2 years." "Are you planning to see him?" "I don't know. I care about the person he used to be, but I need to see evidence that he's working, to become that person again before I risk getting hurt." Amanda's wisdom impressed me. She understood the difference between loving someone's potential and accepting their current reality. 2 days later, my phone rang with a call from Marcus. His voice was different, smaller, more uncertain, stripped of the false confidence Jennifer had cultivated in him. "Mom, I think I made a terrible mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "Jennifer left me. She said she'd found better opportunities elsewhere. And now I'm looking at everything that's happened over the past 2 years, and I don't recognize the person I became." "What specifically don't you recognize?" "How I treated you at Dad's funeral. How I tried to manipulate you when you were grieving. How I convinced myself that exploiting your vulnerability was somehow helping you." For the first time since our confrontation, I heard genuine remorse in his voice rather than strategic apology. "Are you sorry you did those things, or sorry about how they turned out?" "I'm sorry I did them. I'm horrified that I did them. I keep thinking about Dad and how disappointed he would be in the person I became." "Your father loved you unconditionally, Marcus, but he also believed that love without accountability enables destruction." "I know, and I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough to fix what I broke." "What would be enough?" "I don't know. I was hoping you could help me figure that out." The vulnerability in his voice reminded me of the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he'd made mistakes, genuinely wanting to do better rather than simply escape consequences. "Are you willing to do the work to understand what happened to you and how to prevent it from happening again?" "Yes. I found a therapist who specializes in psychological manipulation and recovery from abusive relationships. I've already scheduled appointments." "That's a good start. What about the financial damage you caused yourself?" "I'm going to lose the house. My credit is destroyed. But I'm not asking you to fix that for me. I need to face the consequences of my choices." The Marcus I was speaking to sounded like the son David and I had raised, someone who understood that genuine redemption required accepting responsibility rather than seeking rescue. Marcus, I want you to know that I love you. I've never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't respect your choices. I love you too, Mom, and I'm going to spend as long as it takes proving that I can be worthy of that love again. 6 months later, I received my master's degree in family psychology, graduating summa cum laude at the age of 59. Marcus attended the ceremony, sitting with Sarah and cheering when my name was called. He was living in a small apartment, working 2 jobs to rebuild his financial life, and attending therapy twice a week to understand how he'd been manipulated and how to strengthen his resistance to future manipulation. The Catherine and David Winters Foundation had helped over 200 families navigate financial exploitation cases. Our educational programs were being implemented in 3 states, and we'd secured funding for a nationwide expansion. Most importantly, I had learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to victimize you is refuse to remain a victim, not through revenge or cruelty, but through the quiet dignity of knowing your own worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. David's death had taken away the life I'd planned, but it had given me something unexpected: the strength to build a life I'd never imagined possible. A life where my worth wasn't determined by other people's treatment, where my happiness wasn't dependent on their choices, where my love for my family included healthy boundaries that protected everyone involved. The woman who had been introduced as someone else's new mother at her husband's funeral was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that the most profound transformation isn't about changing other people, it's about changing yourself into someone who refuses to be diminished by others' dysfunction. That realization didn't just change my relationship with Marcus. It changed my relationship with myself, with my grief, with my future, and with my understanding of what it truly means to love someone. Real love doesn't enable destruction. Real love creates boundaries that protect everyone involved while offering opportunities for genuine growth and redemption. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is refusing to participate in their worst impulses, even when that someone is your own child. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is learning that your worth exists independent of anyone else's recognition or treatment of it. The funeral had been the end of one story, the story of the woman who defined herself through others' needs and choices. But it had also been the beginning of another story, the story of a woman who understood her own power and wasn't afraid to use it with wisdom, compassion, and unshakable boundaries. That story was still being written, one day at a time, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.